Before we get started with the video, I would like to announce the expansion of the channel's online store. In addition to selling military maps, I have just made a t-shirt detailing the commonalities between liberalism and Marxism. Be sure to get the promo code in the description in order to get a discount. Thank you. Thus, the Stavka issued the basic directive for Bagration on the 31st of May, 1944. Unlike previous general offensive plans, this scheme limited the fronts to attainable goals, with initial front objectives west of Minsk not more than 150 kilometers from their starting position. However, even with these attainable objectives, appropriate logistics was needed to support such massive troop deployments in order to exploit to operational depths. Soviet industry was still vulnerable, even with the Axis nearly out of their core. In the early period of the war, there was an overmobilization of labor geared for the war economy that detracted from the production of consumer goods. Such actions helped increase armaments production, but also had dire consequences for things such as agricultural production, thus producing inflationary pressures in the civilian economy. Historian Jeffrey Hosking writes, traveling by train from Murmansk to Moscow in the summer of 1942, Alexander Wirth saw peasant women selling food of all kinds on station platforms, either for very high prices or for barter. It should not be understated that Allied Lend-lease contributed to a sizable chunk of Operation Bagration's eventual success. In particular, there were already pre-existing gaps in enemy resistance, like between Vitebsk and Orsha, so mobility was a necessity to exploit to operational depths. The enemy did not calculate on the possibility of large troop formations and equipment being employed here. So how much did Lend-lease help in Bagration? Combined with the factors already cited, a lot. It is one thing to speak about how American Lend-lease amounted to $11.3 billion, but by 1944, the supply of external resources amounted to 17% of Soviet national income. Most importantly of all, over half of the total number of Soviet light vehicles were supplied by Lend-lease, given that Lend-lease peak deliverables had already been achieved by late 1943. An operation of this magnitude could simply not have happened without these resources, or statistics, to back it up. But now as we look at the other side, we see an even more desperate picture. The frail German war economy. But don't worry, I'll be fast. The conventional historian will state that German war production actually peaked in 1944, with the main categories being armor, aircraft, and artillery. However, people always ignored the civilian element of economies in exchange for oversimplified raw figures. According to economic historian Mark Harrison, when compared to the previous Soviet labor overmobilization, under comparable circumstances, German resources swiftly became overmobilized and military economic collapse followed. Further data to back this up is the shrinkage of the German labor force from 10.5 million in 1939 to 7.75 million by the end of 1943. So although at a glance German production capacity seemed very strong, price controls were actively maintained in order to hide the inflation caused by overmobilization. The point of this is that the Soviet exploitation to operational depths would not be sustainable without Lend-lease, given that we have late war Germany as a case study. By now we should have some familiarity with the military situation of 1944, the reason why Operation Bagration was planned the way it was, the economic situation of 1944, and the doctrinal developments of Germany and the Soviet Union. I would just like to say that my videos would not be possible without the support of my patrons. Thank you so much, and if you're interested in becoming a patron, please check the pinned comment or the description. On June the 6th, 1944, Western Allied forces began pouring into Normandy, France, in what would be deemed the largest naval operation of the European theater of war, Operation Overlord, otherwise known as D-Day. Although around 1 million Allied soldiers would eventually land ashore by the 1st of July, they would be limited to a vulnerable beachhead. It wouldn't be until nearly 2 months after the initial landing that a breakout would even be attempted via Operation Cobra. Due to this delay, some use this as an argument of Operation Bagration's importance and how it consumed the main German forces to allow Western Allied breakout to even be possible. However, we're simply using D-Day as context to the immediate situation preceding Operation Bagration. Whatabouteries will be for another time. It should also be mentioned that Cherbourg was already being besieged, and mechanized units were being diverted west, which further helped Bagration. Now that a Western front was finally opened, it was the Soviet Union's turn at attacking the Axis. Contrary to popular belief, Bagration was not Rokossovsky's brainchild. However, his role was critical to ensuring its success, as seen with his previous insistence of a double envelopment of the town of Bobruisk in conjunction with the main attacks on Vitebsk and Minsk for Bagration. However, some historians dispute this. He held this position with Stalin himself, even after Molotov had taken him from the room and asked if he remembered with whom he was arguing. Stalin eventually agreed, reminding Rokossovsky that it was now his responsibility. Such hesitance may have been warranted not only for the complexity of the operation, but because the Bobruisk-Slutsk operational direction had difficult terrain, making the use of the 2 Soviet tank corps in the attack particularly challenging. Having said all that, very few officers, all of which were members of the general staff, knew of the full scope of the overall operation, and this was precisely why the operation garnered so much success. Secrecy was so integral to Soviet strategic redeployments, especially concerning that of the 5th Guards Tank Army and the 2nd Tank Army, the former being attached to the 3rd Belorussian Front and the latter being attached to the 1st Belorussian Front. The Germans genuinely believed all of the Soviet tank armies were attacking the south, and although they knew of the position of the 2nd Tank Army, its position on the left wing of its respective front gave the Germans the false impression of a southward attack. Along with radio silence, limited reconnaissance, smoke, encryption, and so on, the Soviets also relied on couriers to communicate key messages between the fronts and the Stavka. This may seem old-fashioned, but it ensured the most secure method of communication. Apart from the above-mentioned Maskirovka strategies, the Soviets chose to reinforce previously positioned units in the area rather than to draw attention by moving too many units from other sectors. Even fake armies were erected in the peripheries of the operation by the 3rd Ukrainian and 3rd Baltic fronts. Most long-range aviation armies were kept in the south, and local air forces were kept from aggressively engaging the enemy. Couple this with distractions caused by the Soviet offensives in the Crimea and Finland, and it is no wonder that the Germans failed to detect Soviet strategic redeployments. That, and the fact that Soviet attacks in early 1944 Belorussia ended in such failures, thus solidifying German confidence in maintaining stability in the region. Such miscalculations are further reflected in specifics of the correlation of forces in the summer of 1944, in which the Soviets achieved an astonishing 10-to-1 superiority in the areas where penetrations were to be conducted.